Hello everyone, this is Neil Daly, Director of Merchandising at Floor Coverings International. In this training session is going to be talking about three different products with one common visual. It's tile. So that contains ceramic, porcelain, and natural stone. We're going to break it out into 5 different categories. First, understanding how tile is made so we know the differences and how to explain it to consumers. We're going to talk about the unique characteristics of each of the different categories. Once we've got it sold, what are the installation requirements that are needed to make sure that the customer is going to love their floor for as long as they own their home? Talk about some style trends, and of course, last but not least, how do we make sure that we have an appropriate quote built for your consumer? Tile is by far the most widely used flooring around the world. The reason being, once it's installed, it is permanent. In fact, there's natural stone tile floors that have been down for over 3,000 years that are still being walked on today. Now, the big key for the product is, of course, proper installation, proper care. But when properly installed, truly, it can be a permanent floor. Unlimited size and color variations within tile are possible because there's so many sizes right from the manufacturer. But beyond that, a great artisan installer can cut tiles to every different shape imaginable to make a truly one-of-a-kind installation. It's also the product line that we use outside of typically fireplaces if it's not brick. In fact, all fireplaces, wood stoves, anything with open flame cannot have combustible flooring within 18 to 24 inches of that open flame source. Be sure to check with local codes if you try to put in anything closer than 2 feet, because most of them are in that 18 to 24 inch range today. Other thing to consider is tile is non-absorbent, so great for those that have odor concerns, and it is waterproof. It is the only product that we put in a true wet application, which would be inside of a shower or inside of a tub surround. Also, if for some reason the tile is damaged, because if you were to drop something heavy on the tile, obviously it can crack or chip, it can be repaired. Every tile job that we install, we highly recommend the consumer have an extra box of tile that they keep in the attic or in the garage somewhere, so that when the time arises they get a chip, it can be easily fixed. And unlike most hard surface products, it does not change due to sunlight. It will not fade, and you cannot stain a quality tile, at least none that we sell. And of course, extremely durable again. It is the most scratch-resistant product on the market today. And of course, for those that have needs for hair salons and such that are using a lot of chemicals, it is the best product by far, again, because it's non-porous for that application. So why does not everybody have tile throughout every room of their home if it's permanent and does all these wonderful things? Well, it's cold and it's hard. Especially a concern for people who have joint issues, lower back and knee issues especially. They don't like standing on tile. In colder climates, it is definitely a concern because tile, while it will always be the temperature in the room, when you touch it, it draws the heat away from your body. It's a great conductor of heat. So if you've got a cold floor and you put tile on top of it, it's going to feel that much colder. Of course, you can crack and chip it, as I'd mentioned. It's not bulletproof, but with proper installation, it can be extremely, extremely durable. And of course, if you've had stains and grouts before, it's because it's the older styles. Those older styles are still the most popular grouts sold today. They're cheap. They're very easy to work with by installers. But low-quality grouts stain and they crack. And of course, tile can't move once it's installed, or it will crack. The subfloor must be completely rigid. So if we're putting tile over top of anything that's wood, we have to take additional steps, which we'll cover, to ensure that that floor does not move so the tile and grout does not crack. And as you can imagine, it is a multi-step process. While tile itself can be very inexpensive, when you look at the combined cost with installation, especially those over wood subfloors, it becomes very quickly a very expensive product to install compared to some other options. But once done, you don't have to do it again. Permanent. So there's the basic pros and cons. Lots of others out there that we'll cover in additional trainings. So let's go ahead and talk about how tile is made. Essentially, you've got two different construction types. You've got natural stone, which, as you can imagine, is just quarried right out of the mountain. It's from all over the world, everywhere from right here in Georgia all the way around the world, you'll find stone being quarried. The most common types of natural stone you'll find are listed here. Travertine is very, very popular today, as well as marbles. We don't see a ton of granite, slate, and onyx being sold in flooring. Seeing a lot of that used in decorative tiles, especially in backsplashes and tub surrounds and things like that. But primarily in the natural stone category, you'll typically see marble and limestone for flooring. And what we're showing here is the actual quarrying process, just to give you an idea of the scale of the quarrying. It's massive slabs that are taken out for this process, and the cutting is pretty amazing what they're able to achieve. The other, of course, is ceramic and porcelain, man-made products, and this is the bulk of the industry. Ceramic tile is actually a mixture of different clays that are put together and then fired at extremely high temperatures, typically 2,000 degrees or above, and then, of course, glazed on the surface for wall tile, or glazed and then baked if it's floor tile. The bisque, the body of the tile, is what actually gives us the strength and durability, so there's some differences there as well. So it is a very different product. You're essentially taking clay and creating a tile rather than just cutting natural stone. Those clays are actually, again, all different types of minerals and compounds that are pulled together. They essentially grind it up into a very, very fine powder. They then mix that fine powder together and press it into a mold. And on this next slide here, you're going to see all the crazy different amounts of processes that go into it. But to sum it up, you take that raw powder with the right blend, with the right moisture level, you press it into a mold, you then apply a glaze to the top if it's a floor tile. The glaze is applied a little differently for wall, but we'll talk about that too. We put the actual print layer on the surface, and then it's baked. If you've ever done pottery work or seen that done, it's very similar to what's done here. The big difference is that with pottery, you're working with a wet clay. With porcelain and ceramic, it's a dry powder that goes into the process. So essentially what I'm showing here is the raw bisque. It's going to be a multitude of different colors. There's some red clay bisques. There's some white bisques. The bisque color really doesn't matter to the durability. The durability, again, comes from the time it's fired and the temperature it's fired. There's a lot of myths in the industry about that as well. The only real advantage to a light-colored bisque, meaning the body of the tile, is that if you are doing a corner cut and doing an insert, that light color doesn't show up as much as a dark body along the cut edge of the glaze. Now, once they have this mold created for the bisque, there are some tiles that will run through an additional process where a drum is placed on the surface of it to create some texturing as well. And from there, again, it goes through a glazing process. The glaze is essentially what seals the surface of that clay mixture. That is actually a very refined mix that's very similar to glass when it's applied to the top. Now, if you ever looked at a high gloss tile, you will see that high gloss tiles that have a thick glazed surface, they can be scratched just like glass, but it's extremely difficult to do so because glass is so hard. The other thing to consider, like glass, is, again, it's impervious. You can't get liquids and chemicals to penetrate the surface. So it creates a completely non-porous surface. Of course, it allows us to create an unlimited color selection, and based on the type and the thickness, the gloss level. From there, it's about adding color. Now, the traditional method the color has been applied is called screen printing. just like they do t-shirts. They essentially drop a mesh across the surface of the tile that has a pattern in it. Ink is then sprayed across the surface, and a squeegee goes across the top to press the ink into the surface of the glaze. As you see here, this is actually a 4-screen tile. And every time the tile goes under the next screen, a different layer of ink is applied to the surface of that tile. Now, this is the way it's been done for many, many years to create the patterning. It's the least expensive method to produce tiles, but the challenge you get is, even with adding more and more printers, you don't get a tremendous amount of depth of color in multiple colors that makes the tile look real. If you're to look at a traditional screen printed tile, the less expensive ones, you'll actually see the screen print right on the surface of the tile. Take a look at your home center tiles next time you're there that they're selling for 99 cents. In a close look, you'll actually see the graining in that print. It looks cheap, because it is. But the realism is just not there with screen printing. It looks like a ceramic tile. And the goal of all this printing process is to make it actually look like natural stone, but they've never been able to achieve that with screen printing. So you get your traditional tile looks. The other thing is, because the screen has a preset pattern in it, you can only get a certain number of unique patterns. In fact, most of the cheap tiles out there, all the tiles are the exact same pattern. The only thing that you get variation is by the installer turning the tiles different directions when they're being installed. So you essentially have a pretty boring look with every tile looking the same, or maybe only 2 or 3 different patterns with the screen print. Here's just a couple examples of what it will look like. You typically get very low shade variance, which means the difference in color from tile to tile is just not there. They all pretty much look the same. What they'll do along the edge, they'll what's called ease or bevel or chisel the edge of the tiles very commonly on this to give it a little bit more character. It also allows for a deeper recessed grout line to help define the individual tiles. And the purpose of that is to make it look more real. The picture on the top of the screen here almost looks like a sheet vinyl because there's such little contrast from tile to tile. And that grout recess is supposed to try to help with that. Now, what we're seeing used instead today, your better qualities are all coming off of inkjet printing. And just like the printer, if you have an inkjet printer at home, the process is almost exactly the same. You essentially have a printer head with multiple colored inks on the surface of it that goes over the surface of the tile and prints directly on the top rather than stamping a screen. Truly, if you can put it in the computer, the digital systems in their printing process will print it right on the surface of the tile. As you can see here, anything is possible for depth of color and blending of colors. Rather than having 4 or 8 different options for colors, there's thousands of color options, obviously, available when you're blending the inks with an inkjet printer. Now, while we don't have a lot of Peacock tiles, the overall impact for the consumer is absolutely amazing. Better quality tiles, porcelain and ceramics today, are so realistic that you have to literally set it side by side with a natural piece. And most times even then you still can't tell the difference between marble and a marble look in an inkjet or a slate and a slate look. They're just so real with the better qualities. Of course, unlimited colors. And what you also get is the ability to fade those colors across each other. So amazing variance and toning. And you can actually create 3-dimensional tiles, surfaces, such that those tiles that have a high quartz content and actually have a translucent face, you can actually replicate that in these tiles so it looks like you're seeing into the tile, not just the surface. Absolutely amazing what they've done with the technology. Our key vendor partner, US Emser, and in Canada, Daltile, are both using inkjet printing. Emser a little more than Daltile. Wait till you see these products. Just absolutely gorgeous. The other thing here is because it's all digitally controlled, there's an unlimited number of patterns that can be put into the system. So rather than having one individual printing, so all the tiles are the same, or on the old screen printing process, if you had 4 different patterns in a single product line, that was considered a lot. That was a luxury screen print. Today, because every single tile is printed individually and controlled with this digital systems, we're seeing digital inkjet printing systems where the tiles will have in excess of 40 individual images that they run. You combine that with the natural turning of the tiles that's being installed, and you'll never see a tile repeat in these products. It looks completely natural that way. So, what is the consumer really looking for? Something that looks like wood if they're looking for a wood simulation tile. Something that looks like marble. Something that looks like granite. All the trends today are to get away from something that looks like ceramic and get into something that looks like it came from Mother Nature. The characteristics are going to be quite different from tile to tile as well. When you're working with a man-made product, the first thing we need to remember is through this printing process, there will be different die lots. And what that means is if you need a tile for a job, it needs to all be ordered at the same time. Because the next time they run the production line on that, if the ink is slightly different mix, the colors will look different. So that's why it's so important for the consumer to have that extra box of tile when the job is complete for future repair. Even if you can get it, the die lot will never match. So you've got to make sure that you get the quantities appropriate when ordering. If for some reason when you order a job and you are short, buy a box. Make sure that you get the die lot information from the installer who's out on the job site and call that in as part of your order. A lot of our guys will actually go and pull a die lot, and if there's none left, find one that's very close to it for you as well. And the way that we help eliminate die lot variances, all installers should be mixing a minimum of 3 different cartons of tile together randomly as they're working throughout the entire project. If it looks like they're going to be short for some reason, we didn't order enough tile, they should still hold back a few boxes and not install so that the die lot that comes in, if we can't get the same die lot, we can continue to again blend that in for a natural transition. Tile is basically grouped into 4 different categories. There are some tiles that are made so that the color is almost the exact same across all the different tiles, while others are at the very other end of the spectrum. The texture and the color variation is practically random. And that's what we talk about here in our V1 through 4 shade and texture variation rating system. This is universal throughout the flooring industry. So a V1, as you can see in the images below, is a tile that if you pulled out 16 tiles are pretty much all going to look the same color and very little differences in texture. A V4, truly you can have completely different color tiles coming out of the box. A slate look is a perfect example where you could have a blue, a burgundy, and a gray and a yellow coming out of the same box because that's what it's simulating from a natural product. And of course, you have your more moderate variations in your middle ranges there too. When we're talking to the consumer about tile, having the discussion about how much contrast there's going to be from tile to tile is something that we just need to touch on. And we use a lot of room scenes and photography to help us with that as well, because it's a little difficult for the consumer to visualize otherwise. But make sure you have that conversation. A lot of more modern decors prefer a tile that has less variation in tone from tile to tile. Decor that is a little more rustic typically leans towards the heavier contrast from tile to tile. The durability of tile is certainly different based on many different factors. But luckily, this is the one thing in the flooring industry that has a standard, and the standard is across all manufacturers and how it's tested. It's called a PEI, or Porcelain Enamel Institute wear rating. This rating system allows us to ensure that we're putting the right product to the right application. If it's a grade 1 or 2 in the PEI scale, we only use those for walls, never for floors. They're too soft to be put on the floor, but they're perfectly fine if you're not walking on it and seeing that kind of shoe traffic. Grade 3 is certainly durable enough for any residential application, and also some very light commercial applications. Grade 4 or above, high traffic, light to moderate commercial. And if you're looking at a grade 4 plus or grade 5, depending on what scale you're looking at, they're the same thing. That's the type of stuff you can put in a mall. Off the charts, bulletproof tile. So all the tiles that we have in our mobile collection, it will specifically tell you right on the tile if it's made for floor or made for wall, and the PEI rating for each. Water absorption is not something that we need to be concerned about through the face of a tile, meaning the part that we'd actually walk on. But we do have to consider water absorption if we're going to be doing work outside. We don't have to be concerned if we're putting it in a shower surround. We do not have to be concerned for a tub surround because, again, it's only the surface of the tile that's exposed to water in that application, not the back, not the sides, strictly the face. But water absorption is absolutely a factor if we want to put the tile around an outdoor patio, because if it allows water to absorb into the back of the tile and the home is then in an area that has freeze and thaw conditions, the water inside that tile will expand when it freezes and the tiles will shatter. We only put impervious and vitreous tiles for that reason in outdoor applications. All tiles are rated based on water absorption and being frostproof for that reason. Very commonly, if you're looking at porcelain tiles rather than ceramic, you're usually pretty safe because just about every porcelain is going to be vitreous or impervious. Not a single ceramic can be put outside because all of those products are going to be in your non-vitreous and semi-vitreous categories. If you're ever in a commercial application, they're probably going to ask you to provide 2 additional numbers. Again, all of these are on our samples. The first would be a hardness scale. And the hardness scale talks about how much pressure has to be applied to the tile before it breaks. Just normal foot traffic with proper installation, the tiles won't break. But if someone were to be rolling a pallet jack, let's say, or driving a forklift over top of the tiles, that can be enough pressure to crack a lot of your softer products out there. So they do have a method of hardness, also known as a MO scale, 1 through 10, being measured for how hard it is to crack that tile. 5 or greater, you're safe for most floors, but some commercial applications may ask for a specific minimum. Again, this is only for commercial folks. You'll never get a customer asking about a Mohs scale in a residential application, but you may have to look at that for providing the proper spec for commercial. Same holds true for the COF, coefficient of friction scale, where it's talking about the surface of the tile. How slip resistant is it? Wet and dry, it's tested both ways, and they set a particular measurement on that. We list a couple here. All of our floor tile exceeds the ANSI compliance for flooring. When working in an area that's going to potentially have water on the surface on a regular basis, like outside of a bathtub or shower, we want to increase that coefficient of friction, especially for the clientele that have mobility challenges. In fact, 0.6 is the minimum requirement for that in commercial applications, senior living facilities, hospitals, and the like. So just something to think about if you have a consumer who's concerned about slipperiness. We have a scale that measures exactly that, so they compare tile to tile. Anything that's 0.6 or above should be perfectly fine for wet application. Now, when you look at the differences between porcelain and ceramic, we've touched on a couple, but just to highlight some of the big advantages to porcelain. It used to be a lot more expensive than ceramic, but today the costs are very little between the two. The technologies have come so far that the costs are truly pennies difference. But with a porcelain, you get a much, much more durable bisque, much denser, much heavier, much more resistant to cracking. You also get, of course, the non-absorbent bisque. Ceramic, the only reason, honestly, ceramic's even sold today is to be able to hit a price point. Again, you're talking anywhere from 8 to 20 cents a square foot difference to the consumer at retail. So for the small difference in price, we only show one or two ceramics in our mobile. Everything else is porcelain. There are some big differences, as we talked about before, the different grading for floor and wall. I want to share with you some of the differences there as to why and some of the language used within our industry. Floor tile is essentially made where they take the bisque, they apply the glaze, and they bake it. And as I mentioned, they bake it at over 2,000 degrees for a long time, sometimes as much as 2 days at 2,000 degrees. So it's extremely hard. The term for that process is called single firing tiles. Everything's put together at once, baked at once, and then you have your finished product. The Italian name for single fired is Monacatura. So if you hear people talking about Italian tile, it's not always they're talking about country of origin. It's a method of construction, the Italian tile manufacturing process, Monacatura. When you also take a look at wall tile on the other side, it's a completely different process. And the reason they do that is wall tile, they'll usually have lots and lots and lots of different colors that they have to run of it, but they don't want to carry a lot of inventory for something that's pretty low margin. So what they'll do is they'll essentially bake the bisque so that they can store it. And then as they need a particular color, they'll take the pre-baked bisque, run it through the color and glaze process, and then bake it a second time. That twice-fired or bicatura process is, again, only used for wall tile, but it's much softer. It's very fast for them to do that. You can, within a couple hours, have wall tile through the baking process rather than as much as 2 days for the Monacatura process. So it's much softer. Perfectly fine for countertops or wall application. And again, we specifically call out the differences on all of our samples just to make sure. Now you can put a floor tile on a wall because it's extremely durable. You can put it anywhere. But you can never put a wall tile or a countertop tile, which is soft, on the floor. It just won't take the wear and tear. And the last note that I have here, some floor tiles run through an additional process after it's baked to make the tile perfectly sized. Because when you put that clay bisque in the oven with all these different compounds together and you bake it, it actually shrinks. And they don't all shrink the exact same amount. So the size from one tile to the next in the box can be off just a hair. That's why we have grout. So the installer can center the tiles on each other without having to worry about every single tile being slightly different in size. But with some of your higher end tiles, they run it through another machine after it's made to shave the edges down and make it perfectly square and perfectly sized, just like natural stone would be, because that's cut to the exact size. It's not baked. So some floor tiles, your better qualities, will have the term rectified porcelain instead of just porcelain as part of the name. The other term that I want to share with you is used strictly for wall tile. It's the term nibs. It's not uncommon for a lot of your smaller wall tiles, if it's not on a sheet, which is called a mosaic, your small tiles will have little bumps that stick out from the side. They're supposed to be there. It's a built-in spacer for the installers. Because small tiles and spacers are very challenging and slow to work with, they build it into the design. And you don't see those nibs once the tile is grouted. The nibs are actually below the surface. So just some industry language that you'll hear as you go through. So when we look at how the product is installed, it requires a lot more than just spreading out some glue and sticking a tile down. Now, ceramic tile, as I mentioned, it's completely rigid floor. It doesn't bend. It doesn't flex. If you try to bend it, it breaks. So we have to put it on top of a floor that does the same thing. It has to be completely rigid. So floor tile, we can go directly over a concrete slab floor in a basement or in a slab-built home construction just by spreading our mortar, which is called thin set. You spread it out, set the tile in. That slab doesn't move. Great. Very inexpensive. But anything other than going directly over a concrete floor requires reinforcement. Again, plywood expands and contracts, and it flexes. So over top of that plywood, we have to put in some type of reinforcement. And the most common type is a cement backer board. On the floor, we use a 1/4 inch thickness of that cement backer board. I'm going to show you in just a sec what that looks like when installed. Now, the industry is also going to tell you that if you have a total combined thickness of 1 1/4 inch or greater of exterior grade plywood as your structural subfloor, that you can put tile directly over top of it. In my nearly 24 years in the flooring industry, I've never seen a home that has that. So while it's written there, ignore it. We don't put additional layers of plywood in the customer's house to create trip hazards going from room to room. We use the thinner cement backer board because it does its job and it keeps the total thickness very low. We also, of course, do a lot of tile work on walls. And when working on walls, if we're doing a backsplash around the kitchen, we can go just directly over top of the sheetrock or the green board that's there. Not a problem. We just use a special product called a mastic. We spread it across, press the tiles into it, no tremendous amount of work. But if we're going to be doing it in a wet area, again, around a tub, around a shower, we have to use cement backer board because sheetrock and green board in those applications would absorb water, mold, and fall apart. So we have to create that waterproof backing. We use a 1/2 inch on the wall because we're attaching it directly to the wooden or steel studs. We need the 1/2 inch on the wall, which is thicker, because between those studs there's no support. On the floor we can get by with only a 1/4 inch layer because we're going to support that 1/4 inch layer with the thin set mortar and of course the plywood that's beneath it throughout the entire floor. So that's why we can use the thinner product because of the support that's under it on the floor. And we actually need the thicker board on the wall. The costs for those two are truly within pennies a square foot of each other. Not a big difference on when you're pricing. In fact, we only price a single price point in our calculator for your proposal systems. But just know this, if you're doing cement board on a wall, make sure you order the 1/2 inch extra thick product there. So as I mentioned again, when going directly over concrete slab, simply spreading out the thin set. No additional prep is needed to the subfloor to make it rigid. It's already rigid. But the floor must be flat. If your floor is not flat, spreading out the thin set will not make it flat. All the thin set does is it applies essentially 1/8 of an inch of adhesive, which is your cement thin set, to hold your tiles down. It doesn't flatten out the floor. And I don't care how great the installer is. If your concrete floor is wavy, your tile that's going on top of it's going to show that too. And you may never have seen it on the concrete, but the moment you put tile across it, you have all these grid lines at the edges of the tiles, it becomes very obvious. So prepping the floor to make sure it's smooth is important. We need to test the concrete. As part of your process, you have an 8-foot metal straight edge. that's in your mobile showroom package. Bring that 8-foot metal straightedge in, lay it on its edge on the floor, and if you see anything greater than an eighth of an inch gap across that 8-foot span, we have to do some additional prep to make it smooth before we begin our work. Now, if you see that there's any large cracks in the floor, that's going to have to be addressed as well. We can certainly take care of that as long as it's a single crack and we don't see that there's collapsing of the concrete. All the flooring has to be the same elevation. And some cracks are on purpose. They're called relief cracks. That's very normal for us. But if we're going across cracks, it means that joint's going to move. And again, the movement's what we have to stop with tile. So there's an extra step called an anti-fracture membrane that the installer should use when prepping the floor. And it's actually a liquid, so that they're going to spread out this liquid. It has to dry. It's not cheap. It's going to add about $200 between materials and labor at our cost to take care of that. But just factor that into all your concrete jobs bigger than a bathroom size, and you'll have it covered. Remember, also, if you have a new home, very common for new homes to have a lot of settling within the first few years. It's especially important that we use anti-fracture membranes when going over concrete for new home construction. Concrete's got to be cured a minimum of 28 days and then still coat with the anti-fracture membrane. When we're working with wood subflooring, though, again, we have to do a little different process. What you see here on the right is the most traditional method. This is your cement backer board. So essentially the installer takes the thin set, they spread the mortar out, they cover the plywood with this mortar. On top of the mortar, they set a 1/4 inch thick cement backer board, which is then either nailed or screws are used to fasten that into the structural subfloor. Using the thin set under the cement backer board is an integral part of the process. That adhesion and the bond is very important. Then, of course, once that's all got the thin set down, your cement board is then nailed or screwed down to the floor on top of that. The installer is able to start spreading out the thin set. Just like concrete, if that wooden floor was wavy, then prep would have to be done to flatten out before this process begins. It's not that expensive to prep a floor out. It's not, from materials and labor, you're probably going to be at about $1 a foot cost. But that extra step to make sure that that base is very flat before we begin our process, completely different look when the job is finished. Now, the orange stuff you see here on your left, that's a little different. It's a product called Ditra. That's the brand name. We're starting to see a couple of others come out on the market that are knockoffs of it. But Ditra is a very unique product today that's used like cement backer board, but it essentially does a very similar process. It keeps the tile from moving, so it doesn't crack, and it's actually considered a uncoupling system, so that you can allow for a lot more expansion and contraction, and honestly settling for new construction. For that reason, a lot of the contractors are preferring to use Ditra even over concrete if it's a brand new home. The risk of the tile cracking goes down dramatically when using Ditra in that application. What area, as I mentioned, has to be treated? We've got a couple different options here that I'm going to touch on. First, again, it doesn't have to go all the way to the ceiling, but as you can see here in the tub surround at the top of the picture, it comes all the way up to your supply pipe. That's the norm anytime we're doing a shower, is to have that tile board. It doesn't matter what brand you use, Durarock, Wonderboard, HardieBacker, they're all essentially the same thing. It's a cement-based board that water can't penetrate. Same thing around a tub, especially tubs with jets. You've got to bring that waterproof up. at a minimum of 24 inches above a tub height. If it doesn't have a shower in it. If it has a shower, obviously it has to go full height to the stub out for the shower head. The orange one again here is the Ditra technology. Rather than using a heavy cement board that's screwed into the studs, what they use here instead is a plastic coating that goes over top of essentially a foam board. You may hear Wedi or Ready systems. Essentially, they're all very similar. But instead of using sheetrock, it's a foam board. The foam is attached to the studs. It's quite rigid, and then they apply this waterproofing system to the face. Either way, as long as we have a waterproof backer behind the tile, because water can penetrate over time through the grouts and through movement, you're going to be fine. All the tile installers are very familiar with how to use these systems. They use them pretty much every day. But these are the things that we need to consider when we're building our proposals. Does it require a backer board? And if we're doing a backer board, our cost goes up. So you're essentially going to price it out two ways, with backer board or without. Something else to consider when working with tile, the trend for the market is definitely towards larger tiles. If you're over 15 inches on either dimension of the tile, if, for example, the tile in the picture here in the bottom right, this is 8 inches by 24 inches long. Because we're over at 15 on one dimension, it's considered a large format. So you cannot do what's shown here on the bottom left, a brick pattern known as a 50% overlap. The picture on the right where it's showing the actual tile, that's what happens. Tiles are not the exact same thickness from the middle to the edge. When they make the tiles, and every manufacturer has tried to make them perfectly the same thickness, and it's impossible through the baking process. The outside edges of the tile, the ends, are always a little thinner than the middle. And through that process, if you line up the ends of the tile with the middle of the next tile, you create two different heights. And that's why you see the two different heights in that picture. This is the wrong way to do it. That's called lippage. If you see that floor, it looks awful. So to conceal those variations in thickness, and this one looks awful as well because they tried to use no grout lines on it. To get rid of that, you have to use a grout line on all tiles that are not rectified or natural stone. And you don't do a 50% overlap if it's 15 inches or bigger, because those have the most exaggerated difference in thicknesses. You do a 33% overlap, which is beautiful. You'd never notice the difference, but the overall impact is absolutely huge. So you've heard me talk about grout a couple times. Grout is essentially cement that we put dye in it so that it gets pretty. And we can do, of course, all the different colors to coordinate or contrast with the tiles that we're putting on the floor depending on our goals. But grout's the one thing that most people hate because the tiles don't stain. Grout does. But that's the old kind of grouts. Great franchisees only sell premium grouts. Now, the installers don't love working with it. It is harder to work with premium grouts than the cheap stuff because the shelf life on it, once you start spreading it, is very short. And it's a little more expensive. But your better quality grouts will not stain. They're much more resistant to cracking. And some are so good. Some of the pre-mixed products. I personally use Fusion Pro on everything. It doesn't matter how long that job has been done. I can take out a small piece of grout, buy a new bucket of it, and the color will match up perfectly. That color matching is huge because the color fastness is that good in this product. A lot of your other grouts over time will certainly turn gray and fade. Quality grout matters. When your installers work with these materials, they need to make sure that your grout joints are full. So again, it's just a little different process. And when you work with if you do work with the cheaper grouts, which we don't recommend, make sure that you at least add sealing to your proposals, because your customer's not going to seal it, but it needs to be sealed. The cheap grouts need to be sealed on a regular basis. And the other challenge is it takes a full 24 hours after the grouting has been done before it can be sealed. So sending the installer back a couple of days later, it's not convenient. So just please sell better quality grouts. Your customers will love it in the end. What most customers have concerned around is the cleanability factor. Now what they want is what you see in the top picture. These perfect, smooth, everything is nice and perfect and even, but that's not grout. That's fake grout. Real grout is, again, it's a cement-based product. And as you can see in the picture in the bottom right here, those tiles are not perfectly lined up because, again, the sizes are off just a hair. That's normal. You don't notice it. You never notice it during an installation unless you try to make the grout lines too small. You can easily hide those differences in size with the proper thickness grout joint. But customers don't want wide grout joints. They're going to always tell you they want something paper thin. But the overall look of the job is absolutely key. So you have to use the proper thickness. Now anything that's under a 12-inch tile on both sides, I would never use anything less than 1/8 of an inch. Prefer a 3/16 inch grout line. And if you're over 12 inches in dimension, you're probably going to want to run with a 1/4 inch grout line. And depending on the tile type, you may need it even larger. Natural stone and rectified porcelain does not necessarily have to have grout. I recommend that you always include it. Because again, it comes back to what looks real versus what doesn't. You can use an 1/8 inch grout line on a marble or a granite and it looks beautiful. Because the stone tiles being cut, they're all the perfect size and perfect square. So the thin grout lines line up perfectly. Now, I can have to share, I've made this mistake too many times. Not only do you have to pick the tile, but your customer has to pick the grout color that they want to go with it. Never assume that they want a particular color. Don't pick it for them. Present the different options in front of the customer. You can help them. But make sure that you note that right on their contract as to the color of the grout that they choose. Because the last thing you want to do is have to make a second trip out to the house because you forgot to pick the color. When working with stone, a couple things to note. In interviewing installers, if the installers aren't asking for more money for doing natural stone, don't have them do natural stone. They don't know what they're doing. Natural stone takes a lot more time to install. Because it's perfectly square and flat, everything has to be lined up perfectly for thickness and every axis to make sure that the stuff looks right. You have to use a white mortar rather than a gray when working with stone, because some stones are very porous, and those stones can pull that gray color into the stone and actually discolor it, especially along the outside edge. Stone has to be sealed twice. You have to seal the stone before it's grouted. Otherwise, the grout can actually absorb into the natural stone, again, because it's porous and affect the color. Then you have to seal it again after the grouting is done. Again, unless you use a really high quality grout that doesn't require sealing, then it's a one-shot deal. Always test sealer with a sample of the stone before applying it, because the impact and look of different sealers when it goes on natural stone is huge. And every stone, regardless of how shiny it is, it has to be sealed, just like your granite countertops at home. And it has to be sealed every time water will no longer beat on the surface. The last thing I'll share is the square edge on the tiles truly requires someone that knows what they're doing from a tile install. when you start selling natural stone, make sure that you take the time to go out on a job site and make sure that your installer is checking that all the corners and all the tiles come out to the same level. There's a lot of different systems out there that I'll share with you in future trainings that'll help with that. But because the investment in stone is so great, if the tiles aren't flat to one another and how the light reflects off of it, it's quite obvious. You can hide that a lot in regular tile. You cannot hide unlevel tiles in stone. So a little bit about the sealers, as I started to mention. There's basically two types. A penetrating sealer does not change the color of the stone or grout that you're putting it on. An enhancing sealer absolutely changes the color that you're putting it on. If you ever want to use an enhancing sealer, you can never go back to the original color of penetrating unless it's all ground off. And that's a huge process. So most folks stick with penetrating sealers. It doesn't change the color. What I've got here is just two different pictures to show you how much contrast it brings. We always recommend before applying a sealer, again, use a test sample, show the customer what it's going to look like. Beyond that, we want to make sure that we show the customer at the point of sale the difference as well when we choose it. Because again, we have to seal the the natural stone before we install it, the grout. The easy way to do that is just take some water and wipe it on half of the tile. The side that you made wet looks like the enhancing sealer. Of course, the dry looks like the natural penetrating sealers. And that's how you can tell the difference. So they make it easy for us to price tile. While there's many different sizes out there, they all do the pricing by the square foot, not the piece. So you don't have to do the crazy math that would be otherwise. Now, decorative tiles are sold individually, and that's the norm. But all of your regular field tile is going to be sold by the square foot. When considering sizes, they tell you how many square feet each box covers. So you don't have to worry about the nominal versus actual size. Just like a 2x4 is not 2 inches by 4 inches, a 12 by 12 tile is probably not either. So don't worry about the exacts. The square feet of coverage per box is going to get you the information you need for doing your calculations. And our software will build that into your proposals as well. Now, from a styling standpoint, still 13 by 13 is the most popular size out there. As I mentioned, the trend is certainly to go larger, especially in the Southwest U.S. We're also seeing much larger tile formats being used in the urban areas. Now, while ceramic is one of the least expensive products that you can buy, the price range is dramatically different from cheap to really high quality. You're talking, you can buy cheap tiles for 70 cents a square foot at retail, whereas a really high quality porcelain will cost as much as a natural stone and in some cases more. And why would somebody buy porcelain instead of natural stone? Maintenance. Porcelain you never have to seal. Stone you always have to seal a few times a year. When you factor in the cost for installation, ceramic is, again, typically in the upper end of our scale. From a styling standpoint, there's lots of simple things you can do to take a very simple tile look and make it very pretty. Doing a straight install and a basic tile is kind of boring. So instead, do a diagonal. Do a running bond or hopscotch pattern with it to make it fun and unique. We can also blend in obviously different sizes of tile within series to create some patterns. And we have some charts that will tell you exactly how much to order of each to make those different patterns work. And then, of course, doing area rugs, decos, and borders. This is not a small investment for your consumer. So taking the extra few $100s to put in those decorative items can be absolutely worth the investment for the consumer. So take a little bit of extra time in working with that tile customer to make it unique, and they'll love you for it. The trending today is such that we're seeing three primary drivers. All tiles are trying to replicate the look of nature, and the closer to that is the norm, which we've already touched on. But larger and larger and larger tiles are coming to the retail market today. Rectangular shapes is the primary driver. 12 by 24s is very normal. 16 by 32s, and so forth. Wood looks, all of which have to be grouted. While it doesn't look exactly like wood when you grout it, all wood tiles have to be grouted. Because they're all over 15 inches, they all have to be a 1/3 offset as a minimum. Wood looks are extremely popular in the market today. You get the warmth and look of wood, but extreme durability. And of course, for backsplashes and decorative accents around showers, the blend of natural stone and glass, and even some metals in some cases, is stunning. And that's really driving the decorative market. You can buy, as I'd mentioned, retail tiles in a home center that they've got pallets of under $1. We have materials that are starting around $1.50 a square foot. But when doing a backsplash, the difference in cost in the materials to go from that boring basic stuff to something truly beautiful could be $500 or $600. So why not make it gorgeous? The maintenance factors, tile's really easy to care for. Essentially sweep it, and if you're going to use a vacuum on it, make sure that you don't have a spinning brush head, just strictly the hard surface suction head only. And then as you need to, mop it or give a little spray and wipe up areas that need it. A lot of folks will use vinegar in their water. That helps keep it from leaving spots if you're working with a higher gloss tile. And then if you go with a natural stone, or if you had a customer that didn't invest in the better quality grouts, then you have to go through the sealing process. Again, the way to test that, if it's needing to be sealed, just put a few drops of water on the surface, let it set there for a while, and if it still beat it up nice and tight on the surface, it's fine. But if it starts soaking in at all, time to reseal. So just in summary, the big benefits for tile, it is considered permanent flooring. And with a quality tile, you add direct return on investment because it adds value to the home. The only two products that did that I'd mentioned previous session, hardwood, but tile and wood are the only two that truly add direct dollars. Amazing design options that are out there. You can put it on floors and walls, countertops. We don't want to limit ourselves strictly to flooring. We can put it indoor and out and create beautiful designs on patios and around pools. It's extremely clean and sanitary for our surface because it's non-porous. It's perfectly designed to go right up against fireplaces and wood stoves because it's fireproof. It's odor resistant. The tile itself is odor proof, and it's waterproof surface. And if you do get some damage, it can be easily repaired. Challenge is it's hard, unforgiving, and very tough for people with joint issues. It can feel cold. Great opportunity for us to add in-floor heating systems, which we also have. The company we work with is called WarmUp. There's nothing better than the combination of having a permanent floor and it be warm to the touch. It's not an inexpensive upgrade, but it's one we do on a fairly regular basis. Great systems. And of course, it is a little more expensive even without the heating system, but it's worth the investment because you get that ROI back on the home value. And for those who've chosen cheap grout, it can be a lot of work to keep it up and keep it looking good. So when we're building our estimates, the last thing we want to just wrap up with here, the most common things that we're going to need to make sure we capture in our estimate, of course, furniture and appliance moving. Appliance moving also is going to have to be considering toilets, pedestal sinks for bathrooms. If you have a freestanding tub that sits out in the middle of the room, that may also have to be disconnected for the flooring to go up underneath of it as well. a lot of the slipper type tubs. There's charges that we have to assess as part of that. Removing the existing flooring, disposing of it, the actual materials to do the job, tile, thinset, grout, and if needed, backer board or Detra. Our basic installation costs, transition pieces, the freight. And freight for tile is a little different. They typically do a square foot fee for huge quantities, but otherwise most of it have a minimum drop fee of somewhere between $50 and $100 for the entire shipment. And then some of the common additional labors you're going to run into out there is variations between wall being a little more expensive to install than floor because the time it takes to work on the vertical surface is a little different. If we're doing a shower, we have to factor in the cost for the installer to build a shower pan, which is a sloping surface for the water to go into a drain. And the needs from market to market are a little different on the shower pans. We're definitely going to want to check with your local code to see what are the requirements for shower pans in your market and who can put it in. Some markets require a plumber to be a part of that process, so definitely need to do a little homework there. Additional labors can be for building in a niche, place for the shower soap and shampoos and things to be set back into the wall rather than applying fixtures to the surface. Doing patterns within the tile takes a lot more time to lay out, so again it can be an upcharge on your labors. And common to all, trip charge for distance and extra visits needed to the home outside of the normal schedule of work. And if we have to trim the doors because we're raising the floor up. Those are all fairly common items that we have to build into our quotes. Our software allows us to capture that information through a simple series of check marks, but just want to make sure that we're taking a look at that before we flip over to the next screens. As always, we encourage you to look for more information. We've listed out our main suppliers here for tile, Shaw Floors, Emser, and Dial Tile. All have great resources through their websites on their product lines. Of course, tremendous videos on YouTube to show how it's installed in different applications. And we look forward to seeing you at TSA, where we're going to lay hands-on product, show you how all these different pieces and parts work together, as well as we're going to talk there a little bit about some of the decorative features as well. So with that, we certainly thank you for your time and look forward to you selling a lot of tile.